Good morning, everybody. I'm super excited because this is the beginning of a series on hybrid conditioning. What do I mean by hybrid conditioning? I mean conditioning where you're trying to optimize both your strength on one side and your endurance, your ability to keep on going on the other. You can think of powerlifters at one end and marathon runners at the other. But most of life isn't powerlifting. Most of life isn't marathon running. Most of life is somewhere in the middle. Certainly jiu-jitsu is somewhere in the middle where you need both endurance and strength. And so this is going to be a series of interviews and a series of conversations with experts who are working in both fields and have something to offer us. The very first guest in this series to kick it off, I couldn't imagine somebody more perfect for this topic, is Mike McCastle. Mike McCastle has set numerous world records and has done absolutely insane feats of strength over and over and over and over and over again, or absolutely insane feats of endurance that have required significant amounts of strength as well. He's also participated in many other world record breaking events. He's worked a lot with Colin O'Brady, the guy who skied alone across Antarctica by himself, then paddled the Drake Passage. So he's well versed in teaching people this stuff. Without any further ado, let's get started with Mike McCastle. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm super thrilled to have Mike McCastle back on the podcast. We've followed many of Mike's 12 Labors projects, and it's been amazing to follow along. But today, Mike, I wanted to discuss more of hybrid training. I know that you've worked certainly many of your own labors have been kind of a mix of strength and endurance, strength and cardio, and you've trained a whole bunch of people like Colin O'Brady, who is an Arctic or an Antarctic record holder. You've worked with MMA fighters, you've worked with climbers, and all of these activities involve strength and endurance and being able to do things that require a lot of strength when you're completely exhausted. So first, maybe we'll discuss how you approach this in your own training. And a lot of people call that hybrid training. Do you agree that that's a good title for it? Is that the title that you use when you're talking about mixing these energy systems and these these training modalities?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hybrid training's is one way to look at it. But really, it's about being able to give yourself options. And so, in my own training, and when I train athletes for high altitude, for mountains, for various terrains, I want to be able to have options when shit hits the fan. So, it's being able to apply strength and endurance when it matters most in unpredictable conditions, and it's just about survival. It's about giving myself different options in different scenarios and being able to have build up my toolbox when it matters most. Yeah.
So on your own challenges, uh, has there ever been one of your challenges when something that you thought would be more of a cardio endurance thing turned into a physical strength thing, or the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything, man. Like pulling a truck. I pulled a truck across Death Valley, 22 miles. I'll use that as an example. Mile 16, if I were to, snap my Achilles at mile 16, that's not a good point to figure out that I didn't train across multiple dimensions, right? It's training across multiple dimensions, and being able to pull a truck, a 2.5 ton truck, that distance, it requires strength, absolute strength. It requires anaerobic capacity. It's like building up a diesel engine, not a nitrous can, right? But I have to be strong too. So it's about building up systems and layers on top of each other and building up that armor so that I'm not confined to one skill set. And skill is another layer of that pyramid as well. So yeah, absolutely. I use strength, I use endurance, I use anaerobic capacity. All of those things were equally important to be able to apply strength for a long period of time in a unpredictable environment.
Yeah, this is um, brought home to me when I was discussing paddling technique of all things with a triathlete. So triathletes live and breathe in zone two, in cardio and endurance. And we were talking about some of the expeditions that I do. And he was the guy who pointed out, man, you got to also do your strength training because although you're going to be spending 95% of your time paddling across lakes and up rivers, 5% of the time you're going to be portaging. And if you tear something in your back when you're carrying a heavy load across unstable terrain, the majority of what you're going to be doing, the 95% paddling, is going to be totally compromised by that 5% unexpected event. So what you're saying here really, really rings true to me.
Yeah, 100%. Strength training, that's building up durability. Your joints, your tendons, your ligaments. You want to be able to be strong for a long time and reduce the risk of injury. And when you start throwing in different environments and the chaos of these types of events that we volunteer ourselves to do, you really you want to safeguard yourself by building up that durability. And another facet of it too is the mind. That's a big part of hybrid training, is training the mind to adapt, to adjust, to integrate into the strength and the endurance, and is multifaceted for sure.
So, kind of at a very basic level, training strength, training for maximal strength, powerlifting. The training for that is kind of counter to the training that you do for maximal endurance. Call that marathon or ultra marathon. And it's the conventional wisdom is that if you increase your strength, you're going to decrease your endurance, and if you increase your endurance, you are going to decrease your strength. So how do those compromises come into play?
Yeah, it's not. It's. I think that's a common misconception when it comes to hybrid training. This idea, it's about the perception. This idea that you have to sacrifice one for the other. When with hybrid training, you really need to look at the system as a whole. What's optimal? What's optimum for me? When you train, if you're training solely for absolute strength, say like a power lifter, then you are going to get really strong. Will you lose some gains in endurance? Sure. But does it matter? What's the end state? It's about reverse engineering the goal. What's the end goal? I want to be able to drag a 400-pound sled across Antarctica, right? So if that's the end goal, let's reverse engineer it. What's required for that? Absolute strength, sure. Endurance, 100%. So if I'm only focused on one discipline, then naturally you're going to have sacrifice. There's no free lunch. There's a cost to it. There's a cost to it. But in the big scheme of things, is that cost worth the reward at the end, the total optimized picture? You have to make that determination. So, am I willing to lose a little bit of strength, or am I willing to slow the strength progression down to get gains in my anaerobic capacity or my aerobic capacity? If I'm reverse engineering the end goal, pulling a 400-pound sled for a long period of time? Yes. If the answer is yes, then that's a different type of periodization. That's a different type of process and plan and program that you have to do. And you have to go into it knowing that it's a balance. You're going to have some loss and gains along the way because you are training across multiple disciplines, right? And there's only one of you. And it's a percentages game at that point.
So let's just take something like strength. What's the strongest that you've ever been?
Man, the strongest I've ever been, probably training to pull that truck required the most absolute strength. So the ratio of that, the focus on that absolute strength to aerobic capacity to anaerobic capacity, weighed a little bit heavier on the strength aspect of it, but it doesn't mean that I didn't make gains and progress on those other areas too. So it's just the emphasis might have been on strength, but I still trained zone two. I still trained those upper threshold zones just to become more efficient at applying that absolute strength that I was gaining, right?
What do you mean becoming more efficient at applying the absolute strength that you were gaining?
Right. So my ability to apply strength for a long period of time required a more efficient cardiovascular system, pumping fresh oxygen and nutrients and all the things that the muscle needs to contract powerfully for a long period of time, building up that efficiency in my anaerobic and aerobic system, building up my VO2 to be able to last longer in those upper threshold zones, and minimizing the denigration of the strength output. So I wanted to peak my strength output and slow down the decline of that strength output from its peak as long as I possibly could. And to a large extent, that can be trained. And that's where the hybrid comes in, right? Because you're going to have diminished returns after a while. You're going to have a diminished strength output. How much can you slow that down? And how long can you can you extend that output for before you crash? And for me, that was the balancing act. That's where the science meets the art, so to speak.
You know what this reminds me of, Mike? The time that we were talking about you breaking the world pull-up record. And the first time you tried that, you ended up in the hospital with rhabdo.
Yeah,
And then the second time, you broke the world pull-up record.
I did.
And you said that one of the things you had done differently was do more cardio to prepare for the second one to help your system become accustomed to flushing the inevitable waste products. So that sounds sort of similar here.
Right on. Yep. That's exactly it. Exactly it. First time I did the attempted the pull up record, I focused just primarily on building as much strength as I could to be able to, lift my body weight up. I think, 220, 95, 97 kilos at the time. I was a lot bigger. So I focused on the strength part. I neglected the endurance. I neglected the aerobic capacity, and I was not very efficient, which led to a buildup of those, the myoglobin in my blood, and it led to me getting rhabdo. But going back to the drawing board, I took a more efficient approach and focused on building up the endurance capacity, the ability of my heart and my lungs to pump the blood through my system, flush out those toxins, flush out that waste, and to be able to be strong longer.
Do you think that on your first attempt there that there was an issue with hydration, perhaps?
Hydration is definitely a key part of that. Um, I think I was pr- I that the hydration I did focus on quite a bit. I could have been a little bit more hydrated, getting in the flow, getting in the zone, but I did have a schedule for hydration during that event. But yeah, absolutely. Hydration. There's just so many things that just need to be on point and calculated, and you really can't wing it when you go into these types of labors or events.
Well, let's talk about this time that you were maximally strong, that preparing for the 22-mile truck drag through Death Valley of all places. Were you on a 7-day training schedule, an 8-day training schedule? What was your block? How long was your block, and what would you do in that block? How many times a day? How would you
Sure,
divide your strength training? How many cardio sessions were you doing?
sure. So it's different for everybody. You kind of got to gauge and see where you're at. What worked for me back then, based on my conditioning, my fitness level, my age, my body, my physical, just where I was at physically is different from the next person. So that's something to keep in mind. What worked for me then is not a cookie cutter way that might work for everybody. But in a general sense, I periodized my training. So I trained. Had an emphasis on very specific systems in a blocked format. Number one, I I needed to focus on getting out of pain. So I was recovering from two knee surgeries still at that time. I had some other issues with my body, with my joints, my body getting back into things. So number one, I needed to get out of pain. Once I worked on the things that were giving me pain through movement and my range of motion, then I focused on building up that max strength, the peak strength. So once I built up the peak strength,
What does building up peak strength look like in this case? Powerlifting, basically, I'm assuming.
getting under a bar. For me, it was getting under a barbell. That's not 100% necessary to build strength. Again, if you're a beginner, there's a lot of different modalities you can use to build up that foundational strength. But me being already, like an intermediate, I would say intermediate to advanced at training under a barbell, that's the modality I used. That was the most efficient way for me. I was comfortable with it. So I started loading up the barbell and doing like powerlifting movements accompanied with accessory exercises, but I was in a high volume, but I was working more in the lower rep range, heavier weight, more recovery, taking a little
So
slower.
so what does that look like? Like what exercises, what rep range?
Bench press, squat, barbell squat, deadlift, right? 5 sets of 5 to start getting in the groove, grease the groove, getting back in the rhythm. Once I maxed out gains with the 5x5, I started working in different rep schemes, pause reps, pause sets, slow down the tempo. I started manipulating different variables of the same compound movement, but I would slow the reps down. I would pause the reps. I would use bands. I would use chains just to get the extra stimulus. Kept the rep range pretty much the same. I think the lowest I got, I would go like 3x3. I never went to the far extreme of doing like 1 rep max training because I didn't need to. The goal wasn't to be a power lifter. It was just to continue to get stronger. So for me, that didn't mean going into, 1 rep, 2 rep maxes. It was staying in that 3x5, 5x5 range, getting a lot of recovery in between sets, and making sure the quality of movement and form was being prioritized over just lifting a bunch of heavy weight. And so the goal was to continue to increase my strength by 1 to 3% every lift. I was lifting 3 times a week, giving myself plenty of recovery, getting plenty of nutrition, plenty of calories and protein in throughout the week, staying hydrated, getting plenty of sleep. There's all these things are important for gaining strength: sleep, your hydration, your nutrition, and again, the rep schemes and the rest that you're getting in between sets. So that block, I think for the truck pull lasted about, I did 2 5-week blocks, 2 or 3 5-week blocks of that strength buildup. And I would have a deload week where I would taper back maybe 20 or 30% in between those blocks, and then I would have another 5-week buildup progression and then a deload week. And I did that 2 or 3 times to complete the peak strength building block. Now, on the other days, I was doing zone 2. I was working on my aerobic capacity, but the emphasis was on recovery for strength. That was the priority, right? So if I felt my body, if I felt like I was entering like I wasn't getting enough recovery, I would take from the other areas, the zone 2 and the anaerobic stuff, to make sure that I was going into each strength session fully recovered, because that was the emphasis,
Mhm.
the peak strength block. After
So you
that,
would cut back on that,
I
or
would
you would
cut
make that
back.
easier
Yeah,
if you felt
I would,
under the weather?
yes, because it's just the total volume of stress, right? So if I'm feeling overtrained or I'm overreaching, that's telling me that I'm building up systemic stress. So the body doesn't differentiate between the different types of stress. I needed to more recovery. So I pulled from these other areas that might have been contributing to the overall stress load on my system so that I could recover better for these strength sessions. Because that was my so I for me it was important to increase my strength 1 to 3% every week. And if I started hovering around the lower end of that range, then I knew that I needed more recovery. I would then tailor back. But if I remember correctly, I didn't really have that issue too much. I think going into the second block of that phase, I started having some issues there. Like I was feeling like I wasn't really getting the recovery I needed. I needed to tailor back, but it was a very brief period. For the most part, things went pretty smoothly. And also another part of that is listening to your body, but also listening to yourself, your mind. Like, what's your motivation like? If I woke up in the morning and I was really dreading more than normal, like dreading the going and deadlifting, right? Like my motivation started taking a hit. I couldn't ignore that. Whereas other times I would just grind through it, push through it, like just be tough. No, there's something, your body's telling you something there. If normally you're pretty motivated, normally you have no problem getting up and getting at it, and then one week you just wake up and you're just crashed, you're like not feeling motivated to go. Like, what's going on there? Am I not getting enough sleep? Am I not recovering enough? My body's telling me something and is using those thoughts and is communicating to me in the way that I can understand and hopefully make adjustments. It's like an alarm system for your body when you take those hits. Whereas before I saw it as like a weakness, maybe, or I'm just being a punk, not wanting to train. Training smarter is being able to acknowledge and accept that sometimes, yeah, you do need to make adjustments. And with the second attempt, that's what I did.
That idea that one of the symptoms of overtraining or one of the signs of overtraining is a lack of enthusiasm for training. Uh, I mean, sometimes you need to push through, but so how do you navigate between those times when you need to push through versus those times where you really should listen and dial it back? Is it just a matter of degrees?
Yeah, man. You check your ego at the door. Ego is the biggest killer when it comes to that. A lot of times it's like having blinders on. You set a goal for yourself, and if you don't hit it right on the money, it's like it's not linear. The progress, just like success or anything else, like it's not linear. You're gonna have dips, but people get the dips and they take it personal. They take it as something like is wrong with them or something. Like, no, that's just a process, man. You gotta understand that they're like mini catapults. Every dip is a catapult. It's a catapult, but you gotta pull back. It's like an arrow, right? You gotta pull back before you launch. So it's understanding that that's part of the process that you recover into the next level. So every time I leveled up in my training or progress, I was recovering into that. And I had to recognize that when I was feeling a little bit of lack of enthusiasm, a little bit of lack of motivation, it's not personal. It's just the way my body is recovering into the next level. You need that little bit of that you need to be able to take those little hits without losing enthusiasm and just know that it's part of the process. It's inevitable. If you're training the right way, it's inevitable. So, yeah, you got to slow it down. Slow down to go fast sometimes.
Okay, so we've got two or three blocks of preparation that are mainly based on strength training. What came next?
So after strength, I rolled into more of an aerobic, a zone two aerobic base building emphasis. So I built up the strength. I strengthened up my ligaments, my joints, my tendons, my movement patterns, and then from there I went into an aerobic phase where my focus and emphasis was building up the engine. Right? I knew that I didn't need a nitrous can. I needed a diesel engine. So I was going from nitrous can to diesel engine, different energy system, different style of training. Still very methodical in the way I train. I think aerobic, because it's such low impact, I could do more in a week. And there's other modalities. I get on the bike. I can get on a. The focus was the heart and the lungs, right? So I could put myself under more volume because a lot of that was low impact. So I was training maybe 5 or 6 days a week, building up that aerobic base. Still training 3 times a week though, with the strength to maintain. I wanted to maintain the strength gains that I had. Now, what did I lose some of that peak strength that I built because I wasn't training as intense at that level? Yes, but again, the goal wasn't just to stay really strong. I needed to integrate these other layers into the optimal picture. So I was willing to sacrifice some of those peak strength gains, knowing that at the end it'll wash out. At the end it'll all balance out for that optimal goal that I was going for. So yeah, so I lost about I want to say maybe 5 to 10% of the strength that I did gain going into that aerobic phase, but it all balanced out in the end. And I did a progression. I think the biggest the for the truck pull the I did a lot of hiking. I was dragging a lot of logs and rocks and things up hills and hikes and mountains to build that up. Very slow, very like slow grinding type of workout sessions, building up in duration and also intensity, but never pushing myself too far out of that zone two. Is like just working on that slow grind. And then I would get on the bike. Some days I'd get in the pool and swim to build that up as well. So again, that was another, I would say, 10 weeks or so of that, of building it. We're focusing on that aerobic base.
Okay.
So then from there, have a deload. Again, there's deload weeks in between the 5 week phase, 2 5 week blocks, deload phase in the middle. Then I transition to skills, specific skills and durability, mobility, durability. So this was about a 6 week block at the end where I maintained the strength 3 times a week. I maintained the newly acquired aerobic base. Oh, I'm sorry. And then after the aerobic, I focused on the anaerobic. So then I needed to get my VO2 max up. So that was the next phase of that. And that was about 6 weeks. So now the emphasis switched from that slow burn diesel engine to now I want to start working on the nitrous can.
to make it up little hills or
Yeah, a
yeah.
lot of hill work, a lot of like heavy, really heavy pulls. Like if we're talking about the truck pull, I was doing like really heavy loaded pulls with resistance bands, like to a fixed object, so I could really get that max effort pulling a harness, fixed object, bands, max effort pulling. 80, 90, 95, 90 to 95 plus of the heart rate max type of work. The fun stuff, right? So I did that for about 6 weeks, built up into that, maintained the strength, maintained the aerobic capacity, and really I was training the zone 4 and 5 upper threshold stuff for the chaos, for the unpredictable, where I had to pull that truck out of a rut, right? Momentum made it a little easier, but I would hit these ruts in the road and it would require a max effort push or pull to get out of it. So I was training for those moments, the unpredictable moments. That was what I was training my, the hard grinds to really get out of ruts and blockages in the road for the truck pull. Then from there, then from there, I went into the mobility and durability phase and skill phase. So I acquired this newly acquired strength, this aerobic capacity. I refined my VO2 output, optimized my VO2 output. Now I took all of these ingredients and now I wanted to apply it into an actual real world situation. So now I started doing more actual truck pulls and the skills and checking my gear, making sure my gear was okay, and doing more of the actual event itself towards the end, skill specific, while building up that, still building up the durability and mobility in my joints and things like that. I needed to protect what I built. So I needed to do movements that ensured that these newly acquired gifts that I gave myself were protected. I didn't want to snap my Achilles at mile 16 of a 22-hour pull. So that's what I ended with.
So a simplistic analysis of this would say, dude, you had, well, let's see, you had 2 5 week strength blocks, 2 5 week cardio blocks, a 6 week skill block. So you had roughly, was that 27, 28 weeks, including the deload weeks to prepare. Why didn't you just pull a truck for that whole time? Why didn't you just do the activity? And it's a similar question that strongman competitors get asked. Why are
Hmm.
you lifting weights when you should be lifting stone blocks? Why are you lifting weights when you should be carrying cars?
So for it depends on the event that you're doing. If it's something that requires a lot of technical skill, then you should be incorporating a percentage of that skill into all phases of the training, right? That's a different type of periodization, right? Where you're incorporating the skill into different into each phase and block. For me, it's the skill was put a harness on and walk forward. I didn't need to dedicate that much time throughout the 6 months because it would have just added to the stress load on my body and it would have taken away from the strength that I needed to even get the truck moving and the engine that I needed to build. So it's like, again, there's one of you, and if I spread myself too thin by incorporating 10 or 15% of each block into skill, I felt like the priority at that point, because again, the skill wasn't a something that I needed to focus on. It's about knowing your strengths. If it's a skill that you're going to need to work on and continue to build and refine in order to be optimal, then yeah, you should. It's like jujitsu. It's like if you're strength training and working on your endurance and your cardio, and you completely take out the jujitsu, and at the end of the 6 months, you take out the BJJ. At the end of the 6 months, you go show up at a tournament. You're gonna lose. You didn't work on the skill because that's something that needs to be built and refined constantly.
And it's a very high skill
It's a
requirement.
very high skill. It's like a spectrum. It's a very high skill thing. Sprinting, the mechanics, the running, like you should be sprinting a certain percentage, 10, 15% of each block and face should be dedicated to sprinting if you're a runner. Marathon training, you should be running, you should be doing the actual thing. But for me, the actual thing was it took such very little skill that I was willing to sacrifice that and put that time and effort and load and energy to the other areas that I knew for a fact that I needed help on, I needed to build up. So yeah, you're 100% right. You should be in, it depends on the event It depends on the optimal end goal. But yeah, I do recommend you do incorporate a percentage of the skill into each phase. But in phase one, it's not going to be 70% skill, 10% strength. And, it's like it's too far out because the goal is to peak into the event. And if I burn myself out too soon, and also if I'm working on the skill too much, I increase the risk of energy, the risk of injury, overload, overuse injury. If I was pulling a truck every single day from the beginning or every single week, it's repetitive movements, it's overuse injury, risk of injury goes up, things like that. So I save that for the back end. I dedicated maybe 4 to 6 weeks of getting the technique down for the pull, little adjustments here and there. It's mostly like the adjustments of the actual harness, getting that right where I needed it and wanted it. But I didn't need to dedicate too much time in the other blocks to the low skill that was required to pull a truck.
I suppose avoiding injury is a constant for all athletics in the way that, say, a triathlete, they're spending roughly equal time swimming, running, and biking, but in their training, they're spending most of their time biking and the least amount of time running because that's the highest injury, the highest chances of accumulating an injury that'll completely derail you.
Right. Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. And that doesn't mean they don't swim during the other phases. I mean, swimming itself, it takes a lot of technique, a lot of skill. Even if you're a natural swimmer, you could always be getting better. But yeah, getting on the bike, building up the engine is definitely a priority in the earlier phases of training, 100%.
I don't think it'll take as long, but let's ask the same question for something for a period when you had your best cardio endurance. When was your best, when would have been your highest VO2 max? When would have been your best marathon time? When would have been your best cardio?
Yeah, well, I would say yeah, best. It's hard to say best because again, I don't train to be best at any of those one things. I just
I meant relative to other stages of your life.
relative. Okay, so when I ran, I ran 20 miles for 100 days straight. I would say during the training for that to be able to run 20 miles every single day for 100 days straight, my zone two was probably the best relative to everything else to be able to sustain that. But doesn't mean that I didn't strength train. It doesn't mean that I didn't train VO2 max for that. It's just that my priority and focus was more on zone two aerobic capacity, building up a really strong engine, diesel engine.
So, what were the training blocks leading up to that? What did that look like?
Same. It's just a percentage. So
Okay.
there was a phase in the beginning where I focused more on strength and durability because it doesn't matter if I have a strong enough engine to run 100 miles, if the ligaments and tendons and joints can't carry me there. It's like endurance is the vehicle, right? Strength is the modality. Endurance is the vehicle that takes you there. So if the vehicle breaks down before I can get there, it doesn't matter how strong I am, and vice versa. If I'm not strong enough, if the axles aren't strong and the belts aren't strong and the things that the engine needs to run, it doesn't matter how much fuel I'm putting in the tank, right? So I still trained strength in a block in the beginning, and then I had to focus on aerobic capacity. It was a bigger phase for aerobic capacity because that was about 80% of my training was probably aerobic.
Do you remember how big a phase it was?
See, that was 2017, man. I
I,
got journals though. I journal everything with these labors. But yeah, so for that labor, I trained. I
we're
want to.
not we're not holding you to this. If you give me a number, we're not going to do an inquisition or an audit and find out that you were wrong.
I will say that for almost all of my labors, I never trained more than 6 months. I usually take about 6 months. Like in my mind, I build a 6 month block period training cycle, a 6 month cycle, because I don't want to overtrain and I don't want to overuse. So if I can help it, I try to keep it within 6 months to allow my system as a whole to just be optimal. That's what's optimal for me. Some people need 8 months, 9 months, or longer. Some people need a shorter amount of time depending on your fitness level. But so I say for that, I probably trained about 6 months. 80% of that was focused on aerobic zone two. And I would say about, another 15% of that was like maximal strength. And, 5 to 10% of that was VO2. And the rest was just like mobility, man. and
When
recovery.
when you say mobility, what do you mean?
Yeah, making sure movement patterns are efficient. So stretching, active stretching, getting myofascial work, all of the things that are required for the movement patterns to be efficient as possible without any restriction in movement. So if I noticed I was developing compensation patterns in my stride and my running technique, I would need to focus more on mobility and fixing those problems, or if I was getting pain in certain areas, I needed to address the pain in those areas before I continued on with the progression. So sometimes it's like yellow light, stop, pause, address the issue, don't put it on the back burner, fix it because it's going to turn into something a lot worse and more like a snowball effect down the road.
You've worked with a wide variety of athletes, from MMA fighters through to Antarctic explorers to climbers. And of course, the stuff that always makes the Instagram highlight reel is the really weird specialized training. It's not
Mhm.
that glamorous to show you telling somebody, okay, you should spend an hour and a half going for a long, slow run. That's not glamorous. But what is glamorous is you putting Colin O'Brady on a rower on top of four Bosu balls that you're shaking around, because
Mhm.
that's visually captivating. When he was
Mhm.
preparing for his rowing expedition on the Drake Passage, I think it was.
Mhm. Right.
So it just take it, but I can't not ask about this stuff. I realize it's a small percentage, but it's so visually captivating. So can you talk about some of the weirder sort of skill development areas or very, very specific training that you set up? And presumably that's always been towards the, or mostly been towards the end of the training progression.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It is a smaller percentage of the training is that sport specific. Various, you start big in the foundational stuff. You build the foundation. That's the big chunk, and then you start refining and refining, and then working on the VO2, and then there's techniques, and then you start to work towards that. When you get closer to the event, you want to start refining the technique and sport specific aspects of it, the fine tuning, and that's what those evolutions and those programming that you see with him on the Bosu balls and the things like that is like, yeah, now we're fine tuning. Now we're taking what we built, what the long, slow, mundane process of waking up every single day and doing, the 2 hour runs, zone 2 runs, the staying on top of your nutrition, the sleep, the things that don't get a lot of, it's not flashy, but it's required. It's like the mundane staircase that leads to success. Then what they see at the end is like, okay, now we're going to take everything we learned and we're going to apply it under simulated real world stress. Can you still apply that same amount of focus and strength and endurance when you're under an extreme amount of pressure? And we can simulate that. We can create environments to a certain extent. We can't completely simulate, let's say, an Antarctic plateau, but we can kind of simulate the stressors that one might feel under those conditions. Because we know that the body and the mind, or we know that the mind doesn't differentiate between a real stress and an emotional stress. So I can emotionally stress you and simulate that and, set up conditions for you to have to perform and apply strength and endurance under unpredictable and chaotic environments. So that will help integrate that ability to perform at an optimal level when it matters most under stressful and unpredictable conditions. And there's a lot of that's when again the art comes into play. You know, the first part, the building up the foundation, that's science. That can be you can build that up. You can make almost any person on the planet stronger. You can make them give them more endurance. That's very a calculated way to do that. But to train the mind to be able to adapt and integrate those things under unpredictable conditions in you throw in a little bit of chaos, that is something that you really see what the person who the person is. You see the character of the person, and it's important to know what decisions you're going to make in those moments under relatively safe and controlled conditions versus to figure it out when you're out there by yourself doing the actual thing. So I usually throw that at the end, towards the end of the training.
Can you give me two or three examples of how you created this chaos in the training to stress not only the body, but the mind and arguably the
Sure.
heart?
Yeah, so I use this. I use this with several of my athletes. One, I trained Cecilina Gracie. So she trained to climb Mount Everest. She never climbed a mountain before in her life. I trained her in 7 weeks to go from relatively untrained in mountaineering to summiting Everest. And the back end of that, again, and the same with Colin when I trained him to walk across Antarctica solo unsupported, is there's a thread of there's a thread that connects the two, and it's the ability to process information, and being able to make decisions, process information, reaction time, balance under unpredictable conditions. So what I used to simulate that was for Colin and for Cecilina, I had them perform puzzles. So I took a Lego set, for example, very basic, very basic Lego set, very basic instructions, and I had them sit into a wall sit, put their feet in ice. So they're getting the cold stimulus. They're getting the vasoconstriction. I'm limiting their gross motor skills, but then I'm still forcing them to think and make sound decisions under those conditions. So when you're in a snowstorm in Antarctica and the winds are blowing, you're minus 40 wind chill, you have to be able to tie the ropes to, set up your tent. The consequence of not being able to do that is death. You can't get it wrong. So what I did with them, I got their heart rate up, simulated that emotional stress. Brain doesn't differentiate between the tiger in the bush or them doing a high intensity interval, right? It's still stress. Got their heart rate up, got them breathing hard. Then I put them in the wall sit, put their feet in the ice, had them solve very basic Lego puzzles, or I had them tie different types of knots with their hands frozen, or I put them in a plank with their hands in the ice first for 2 or 3 minutes. Then I have them go right into a wall sit and have to tie these knots. When I limit their gross motor skills and they're forced to think and use their fine motor skills under an extreme amount of stress and pressure, simulated by the increase in heart rate. So what it would look like is I would have them do, I don't know, 100 kettlebell swings, right? Get the heart rate up super high, high intensity, or burpees. And I would put them right into a plank with their hands in the ice. Now I'm taking away the gross motor skills. Now I'm forcing them to control their breath under stress and pressure, right? They're still in a stressful environment. I have them in a full blown plank. They're still exerting effort, but they're having to make a conscious choice to bring their heart to regulate their system, to recover still under the pressure. So that would simulate the storm that's beating down on them or really unfavorable conditions on a slope on Everest. It doesn't matter. The mountain doesn't care. It doesn't discriminate. It's going to apply steady pressure on you until you either break or you make a choice to keep going. And then from the ice, they go into a wall sit and they're forced to put together the Lego pieces. Do they make mistakes? Sure. It's okay to make those mistakes in training because okay, the consequences they're just going to have to start over, but they're realizing the brain is acknowledging that in the real world this could be death, and the lesson is the wiring of the brain starts to happen at a more rapid pace because it's the realization that the consequence of getting it wrong is I could die, right? So it's a combination of this. I do this with Parkinson's. I train people with Parkinson's as well, and it's really proven that you get the heart rate up and you have them do like tasks and things like that with the increased heart rate. It really helps the symptoms. It controls because they're making a choice to regulate themselves under stress and pressure.
That's so interesting. Is there any formal research on that in neurology, or is
Oh yeah,
this
yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of research you could look, just Google and look it up. But there's a ton of research that high intensity effort coupled with very specific tasks for the brain, tying knots, moving objects around, and then going right into like balancing, standing on a Bosu, after a bout of high intensity effort, is proven to reduce the symptoms or help better manage the symptoms of Parkinson's, which is a neurodegenerative disease. It's in the brain. So again, it goes back to the wiring of the brain and voluntarily putting yourself in unpredictable and uncomfortable situations and forcing yourself to troubleshoot through it. Yeah.
which is really a lot of what you're doing in your personal labors as well?
100%. That's how I started. I tested it on myself first, I was like, man, this really works. And then I started testing it with a wide range of athletes, from tactical athletes to, again, like you said, fighters, to mountaineers, professional rugby players. It works across the board because, again, it's the mind. And at a very basic level, we're training our lizard brains. We're training that primal instinct to want to run, to want to flight in chaos and disorder. So,
So, of course, some of this is you can't repeat the same trick too often. You got to come up with new tricks. So I'm not asking for the complete inventory of like McCastle tricks, but how would it is fairly obvious to see how these ice immersion and task based challenges make sense in a mountaineering or an Antarctic environment. How would a rugby player or an MMA fighter, how would you challenge them emotionally in this same kind of scenario?
right. Yeah, contact and collision sports, man. It takes it's a multi-sensory experience, right? So when you're on the pitch, whether you're on the pitch or you're in the octagon or on the mats, you're using all of your senses to inform decisions, to inform the next move. You're taking sensors. So what I'll do with those athletes is I'll just remove one of the senses. I'll remove one of the senses. So I'll have them do similar one again at a basic level, get their heart rate up, stress them, right? Make them uncomfortable. And then the skill portion of it is, okay, I'll take away their balance and have them solve puzzles. Have them just stand on one foot, maybe on a Bosu, and then have to do portions or movements or techniques by taking away one of the senses from them. Forces the brain to have to adjust and adapt and rewire to a condition or an environment that is chaotic now. It's not what it's accustomed to. It's forcing it to adapt. And that's really all you're doing. Whether I put a blindfold on them and have them react, I work on the reaction time and have them do certain techniques blindfolded. So they're not being able to predict the chaos that's coming, but they're having to react to it. It's like if I get in a car crash and I ask you, hey, what happened leading up to the crash? You're going to be like, I don't know what happened. I got sideswiped. I went black. You know, I just remember being on the curb and the airbag was in my face. And I put you in that same car crash 5 more times, exactly the same. You're going to start piecing together more of that crash. Actually, I made a left turn first. And then actually was I was going, now you know the speed limit you were going. And now you know whether the light was green or red this time. And now you know the color of the shirt that the guy was wearing on the corner. You start bringing in more information. Same exact car crash. Now, with this training is I don't have to put you in a car crash. I could just simulate the stimulus. I don't have to hurt you to do it, right? I could just simulate it. And you're still going to get the feedback. You're still going to broaden it out. And so that's kind of like the idea behind it. And again, this is a small portion. This isn't the prime. This isn't the most of the training. Isn't this? It's not like Mr. Miyagi, freaking day one, where you know we're not doing the wax on, wax off from the beginning. But it is important, and there's a lot of research that supports that doing this really helps the brain integrate the newly acquired strength and endurance and skills and the balance and all the things that you built up systematically to integrate it in a way that you can do it on demand in a chaotic environment. You can train that. The research is out there. You can train that.
Yeah, that's why I led with the admission that this is the Instagram highlight reel
Yeah.
type material, and that most of the work is that slow, boring weightlifting and that slow, boring running and that not so slow, but not that innovative either, sprinting on a treadmill or running up a hill. I do have a question about that build up period, though. Inevitably, when you're, say, running 5 times a week and you're lifting 3 times a week, say, there are going to be days when you're lifting and running on the same day. So, what's your preference there? Lift first and then run first and then
Yeah.
lift?
Lift first. Yeah. So you want to use what's going to require the most, like your central nervous system, right? Like what's going to require the most demand is going to be the heavy. If it's heavy lifting, if you're in a peak strength phase, what's going to require the most of you from a CNS level is going to be the lifting. and are we going to work from there to the lower impact stuff, endurance stuff later in the day? You want a good amount. You want to, maybe 6 to 8 hours between sessions. And again, this is for an athlete who has that time, right? If you're someone who's working a full-time job, you got kids at home, you're not going to be able, and you can't really, you just don't have the hours in the day to split up 2 2-hour sessions. You can combine it. Just know that it's not going to be 100% of either. It's going to be a more, moderate progression. But you want to lift first, for sure.
Okay. It's interesting because various hybrid athletes have got completely opposing opinions on this, and it's I'm trying to find the common uh, thread that underlies this decision.
It's different for every athlete. I mean, that's the way I do it. I know me personally is like I get my lift knocked out first, and then I get a rest and recovery in between. I'm able to hit the marks I need to hit in that endurance session later, the aerobic session later, and it also reduces the risk of injury for me at least.
That's so funny because I've had people argue the exact opposite, saying that you're most likely to get injured during the running. So do your running first, but or rather, your biomechanics of your running are going to go to hell. But they're not lifting at a high level. They're lifting kind of, I'll call it at a recreational level. So the odds of them, you know, really, really injuring themselves on a squat is fairly low. They're doing that kind of as an accessory exercise. They're doing the primary lifts as an accessory exercise to their running.
Yeah, that's not the way. I mean, look, there's more than one way to theoretically. There's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to this stuff. It just kind of depends on your fitness level and your experience and where you're at in your training. A higher level athlete might be able to switch it around and minimize the risk of injury. They have better movement, better biomechanics, better movement patterns. They perform better under that stimulus, that stress. They can pull it off. But I think for the moderate to intermediate athlete, even a beginner athlete, I wouldn't recommend doing it that way because so much focus and priority needs to be on the movement pattern, on the biomechanics, and if you pre-fatigue yourself with a long run or a high intensity, effort, and you deplete those energy stores that are required. This is basic biology. You deplete the energy stores that are required for a maximal effort lift, then you'll be able to get the lift done. Is it going to be at an optimal level? No, it's not. You've depleted the stores, right? Unless you're getting that break or time in between for the body to, and you're getting the nutrition in between to recover and rebuild, restock those stores, the glycogen, creatine, things like that, then you're not going to have as optimal of a lift versus if you did it first before the longer endurance zone 2 session.
So about a year ago, I could be wrong about the exact date, there was a pretty well publicized incident of Tony Ferguson going to train with David Goggins. I think it was 5 weeks before one of his fights. And it was basically a week or 8 days of a hell week, they called
Mm-hmm.
it, of calisthenics and running and more calisthenics and more calisthenics, and then interrupting the calisthenics with time on the bike and time on the treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that seemed insane.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to take a side in this, but what did you think of that?
There's a time and place for that type of training, right? 5 weeks out from a fight, I don't know if I would have done it right then and there just because the risk of injury, just like in Hell Week, right? Just like in actual Hell Week, the risk of injury significantly goes up when you put someone through that amount of stress and volume of work in that period of time. Is there a benefit to that? Mental training? Yeah, sure, 100%. I don't know of how much mental toughness training Tony Ferguson, a veteran in the UFC, needed. But I think the priority or the emphasis on that was the mental conditioning. And again, it's having that balance. It's like I'm not going to do 80% aerobic work in a strength building phase, right? Or I'm not going to have them doing the Legos and the puzzles 90% of the time when they need to be working on strength or aerobic. So I think doing something like that, obviously it was a detriment. It hurt him. And he got injured, right? But then it's hard to measure what he gained in terms of mental fortitude from that and how do you measure that in the actual performance itself? It's hard to measure if the risk was worth the reward there and how much he recovered from that. Because when you're doing that type of training, it's like, what are you tracking? What are you really measuring in that? Are you tracking the buildup of the waste in their body, the lactic buildup, the recovery? Are you tracking, or is the goal just to break them down? If the goal is to break you, I could break you in 20 minutes
Yeah.
and have you just out of the game for 2 weeks. Did you gain a mental advantage from that? Sure, maybe, but now you're out of training for 2 weeks. So what are you going to lose from that? You always got to look at the gain and the loss, and you have to reconcile with both before you do something intense like that. I used to train like that, and I got burnt out. I crashed my system, I got injured. But to me, it's like, okay, well, I'm building character. I'm building the
Hmm.
foundational blocks of mental toughness. It took a lot more discipline, and I gained a lot more mental fortitude from actually having discipline in my training and not pushing myself to those extremes when it was natural for me to want to do that, right? So it's actually, I gained more from having restraint and training smarter. That actually made me more mentally stronger and having more compassion for my body and grace for my body. And I'm asking my body to actually do something that it's never done before. I'm going to treat it with a little bit more respect, and I'm going to be more calculated in the way. But with that said, there is a time and place for that style of training, right? There is a time, but you have to plan it and program it. You can't just do it on a whim and expect to get good results every single time. So I'm not taking away from that training and what he did. I'm sure he gained a lot from it, a lot of like internal mental lessons from it. But obviously he got injured and he got broke from it. So you just got to weigh it out, man.
There's a phrase of yours that I use all the time, and I used it in my book as well, which is train often, test rarely. And
Yeah.
it seems to me that entering a crucible like is that is the test. And but you don't do a test right before a test.
No.
You build
No.
presumably the
Yeah.
most important thing to him was not completing a Hell Week simulation. It was winning the fight. So
Yeah.
that's where everything should have been built towards.
Yeah.
But of course, it's easy for the two of us to sit on the sidelines and nitpick because we don't know the other things that were going on as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I don't know exactly all they did. I do remember seeing something about it, but if I'm going to do something like that in a camp, I'm going to do that way sooner. I'm going to build in a recovery period from that. It's not going to be okay. We do this hell week, and then I'm going right back into train. No, there's going to be a recovery period after that. There's going to be a taper. That's usually what I do because I do work my athlete. I do. There is a portion of that in the training when I train my athletes where it is, high stress, but there's a purpose to that in the training. And I already work in the recovery from that. I don't know if that was done. Maybe it was. Maybe they did have that planned into it. But 5 weeks from a fight, and especially like at his age, again, I don't know all that they did, but it's not something that I would have done personally.
Let's just talk about one last thing here, which is we've kind of been dancing around the mental toughness and sometimes addressing how to build it during with a specific skill development, and then also going through crucibles. But presumably, for some of I mean, all of your labors have involved a tremendous amount of suffering, whether it's climbing a, a rope the length, the height of Everest, or dragging a truck, or flipping a tire, a 250-pound tire for 13 miles. You went into that knowing that there would be suffering and knowing that your mental toughness would be tested. So, how did you build that mental toughness?
Yeah, I wasn't always mentally tough. It can be built. It's something that can be learned. I think mental toughness is like this catchphrase that gets thrown around a lot. It's kind of like, like hybrid training. Mental toughness is just catchphrases. People really don't understand that it's not like something that it's not a switch that you could just turn on. It's something that needs to be built over time. And I wasn't always like that. It's just doing what you said you're gonna do, regardless of the environment. You do what you said you were gonna do, regardless of the environment. And it's being able to do it under stress, under pressure. And a lot of that is like is building up you as a person, like having integrity with yourself. being honest and authentic with yourself, knowing your limits and choosing to go a step past it. It's a choice. It's not building mental toughness when it's thrust upon you. It has to be a choice. That's how you build it. You have a choice to retreat back, but you choose to take the extra step forward. That rewires the brain. It's like I can do this. Okay, I survived it. I want to step past my limits and I survived. What is this? Maybe I could do another step tomorrow. I did 15 steps a day. I'm gonna do 16 tomorrow. Fuck it, I'm gonna do 20. I'm just gonna go for 20. Okay, I got really humbled at 20. I'm gonna take a couple steps back. Again, mental strength and toughness is also being able to step back and not having the ego to push forward until you're crippled and out of the game. So yeah, making the choice is a conscious decision to be mentally strong. It's not mentally strong if it's not a choice. And yeah, it took a long time for me to build that up within myself. I've quit a lot of things in my life. I've given up a lot of times in my life. People don't see that in the labors, but to get to where to become the man who is able to do the labors I do took a lot of trial and error and learning and building and making the conscious decision to keep going when it matters the most, regardless of the situation. Right. And also to step back if I need to.
Well, I don't think there's a better place to end the podcast than there, because that's a pretty profound message. How do people follow you? How do people see what causes you're supporting, what your training is for yourself and for others, and just keep in touch with you?
Yeah, I love to hear from people all the time. People ask a lot of questions about the stuff we talked about today, so I love to talk about it. I'm on all social media, Mike McCastle. I have a website, mikemccastle.com, or just reach out to me on any social media, and I'm always glad to talk to people about this stuff.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Mike. Good luck with your
Yeah,
training.
thank you, brother. Good to talk to you.